I am the quiet space between the chaos, and this is the story of how that silence broke. The first sign was not a scream or a crash. It was a failure of muscle memory. Leila and I were standing at the altar. I remember the exact moment. The minister had just finished the part about the sanctity of the vows, and the photographer was angling for that perfect, wide shot, the moment before the rings. Her smile was gone. Leila had a perfect smile. It was the kind of smile that didn't just lift her mouth. It pulled the light into her eyes. And for one flicker of a second, as she turned to meet my gaze, that light was extinguished. It was replaced by something cool and vacant. I recognized it immediately. It was the same look she wore when she was focused on a difficult crossword or trying to calculate a tax rebate. It was a face of pure analytical focus. I held my peace. The crowd was a blur of silk and perfume. My job in that moment was to stand tall, look adoring, and make this official. So I did. I clamped my jaw down on the feeling of ice water trickling through my chest. I looked at the ring, then back at her. The moment passed and the smile returned. A little forced maybe, but sufficient for the camera. I married her that day. I placed the band on her finger and promised her forever. The second sign came 4 hours later during the reception. We were supposed to be basking in the glow of our first dance, but the formal obligation was over. We were circulating, accepting the congratulations, and it was chaotic. I watched her across the room. She was talking to my Uncle Charles, laughing, a real laugh this time. And then the phone came out. It wasn't a glance to check the time. It was the kind of quick, practiced maneuver someone uses when they need a clean, private moment in a crowd. She held the phone low against her hip, shielded by the white silk of her dress. Her thumb worked quickly. A brief flash of the screen, a tap, and the phone was gone. I remember thinking, who is so important that they interrupt our wedding reception? Then I saw Owen, my best man, standing across the aisle by the bar. He had been my friend since the 3rd grade. He was the one who had helped me plan the proposal, who had talked me through the first argument we ever had. He was family in every way that mattered. As Leila's phone went into her purse, Owen's hand went into his pocket. He pulled out his own phone, glanced at it, and a tiny, almost invisible flicker crossed his face. Not a smile of amusement. It was a quick, private acknowledgement. A transaction had occurred. I felt the blood drain from my head. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't shout. I didn't even drop the flute of champagne I was holding. I simply finished my conversation with my colleague, thanked him for coming, and walked calmly toward the bar to get a glass of water. Owen looked up as I approached. He had that slightly distant look he always got when he was thinking about work. He said, "Elias, congratulations, man. Best wedding I've ever been to." His eyes were clear. His voice was steady. He gave me a firm hug. I looked him in the eye, and the only thing I felt was a terrible, quiet certainty. I knew without a single piece of evidence that something had fundamentally broken. And I knew that my response had to be as cold and methodical as the betrayal itself. From that moment on, the marriage became a surveillance operation. I am an analyst. That's my profession. I work with data models, patterns of fraud, and predictive logistics. I'm paid to see the anomaly in the noise. I was good at it professionally, and now I had applied those same dispassionate skills to my own life. I gave Leila 2 months of perfect behavior. I was the attentive, loving, newlywed husband. I made coffee. I planned a mini honeymoon. I listened to her talk about her new job project. I built a mountain of normalcy around us. All the while, I was documenting. The first rule of fraud detection is to establish the baseline. Leila's baseline was predictable. She took her phone everywhere, never left it unattended, and always used a complex facial recognition lock. I didn't try to hack her phone. That would have been illegal, dramatic, and messy. My goal was leverage, not proof of an affair. I needed proof of collusion and financial misconduct. That was the angle that mattered in court. My first target was the shared financial history. We had joint accounts for bills and savings, all easily accessible. But I remembered a conversation about a legacy gift from her grandmother 2 years ago, money she insisted had to be held separately for tax reasons. I never questioned it. I called our bank's central fraud line, not as Elias, the account holder, but as a concerned customer with a generic query about legacy trust accounts. I learned something critical. Banks often only require a single verified address for all accounts tied to one name. The address on her legacy account was a P.O. box in a neighborhood she had briefly lived in before we met. It was a small detail, but an important one. It was a point of separation. I didn't mention this to her. Instead, I focused on Owen. Owen worked in real estate development. He was always traveling. I looked at his travel patterns, cross-referencing them with the dates Leila had told me she was working late on a supposed big merger for her law firm. She claimed to be in Chicago the 3rd week of the month. Owen's company was having a conference in Atlanta. Discrepancy. I checked the flight paths. A simple direct flight from Chicago to Atlanta at 6 a.m. Plausible, but the real anomaly came from her phone bill. The calls were all routine. Her usage was fine, except for one thing, the data usage. Leila was religious about using Wi-Fi. Her data usage should have been minimal, but for 3 consecutive months, the months leading up to the wedding, her mobile data consumption spiked by 400% on the weekends. This indicated heavy reliance on a cell network, specifically when she was out of range of our home network. If she was truly working late in an office, she'd be on the office Wi-Fi. I hired a private investigator who specialized in digital forensics, a man named Gabriel. I met him in a quiet coffee shop downtown. I didn't tell him I was investigating my wife. I told him I was investigating an executive at my firm who I suspected was leaking proprietary data, and that I needed an audit trail for external communications and physical locations. I need to know every cell tower ping tied to a specific device ID during this 3-month window, I told him, sliding over the required paperwork I had forged using company letterhead. Focus only on times when the device was outside a 10-mile radius of this building. Gabriel didn't ask questions. He just took the retainer. He understood discretion. The pings came back 4 weeks later. They didn't show Chicago or Atlanta. They showed a specific residential block 30 minutes outside of our city limits. A place Leila had no business being. This wasn't about a late-night quickie. This was about a secret life that required a physical location. Gabriel's report pinpointed a small, unassuming 2-story condo building. It was listed under a shell corporation linked to one of Owen's older, forgotten development projects. The unit was discreetly owned by a holding company called River's Edge Logistics, a name that told me everything. Owen was the logistics man. I drove out there one afternoon while Leila was supposedly at a meeting. The building was unremarkable, beige siding, standard balconies. I parked 2 streets over and walked. I wasn't looking for a confrontation, I was looking for confirmation. I walked by the unit. I didn't see Leila's car, which was good. I saw a small, tasteful planter on the balcony, the kind she always insisted on buying. I saw a specific brand of sparkling water, the same brand she drank every day, sitting on a kitchen counter through the window. The certainty grew cold and heavy, a physical weight in my stomach. The next piece of evidence arrived from the financial audit. I had given Gabriel access to every public record I could find on Owen. His asset sheet was complex, full of blind trusts and LLCs. But one document stood out, a small, recurring automated payment monthly from Owen's main business account. The recipient: Legacy Trust Account, LA Gifting. The account name matched the one Leila had established for her legacy money. Owen wasn't just texting her, he wasn't just sleeping with her, he was funding her. This was not a passionate affair, this was a funded, planned operation. I went back to our shared home that night and watched her across the dinner table. She talked about her friend Clara's difficult pregnancy. She asked if I wanted the lights dimmed. She looked like the woman I had fallen in love with. The woman whose future I had promised to secure. I excused myself to the garage. My hands were shaking. I wasn't angry yet. The anger would come later. Right now, there was just the shocking clarity of the data. My whole life, built on trust and shared vulnerability, was a data model that had just produced a catastrophic error message. I logged into our joint brokerage account. I liquidated every non-liquid asset I could legally move. I put the maximum allowed amount into my own personal savings account, an account she did not have access to, and initiated a wire transfer to a retainer for the best divorce attorney in the state. I did it slowly over 3 days, scattering the transactions so they looked like typical portfolio rebalancing. I had the apartment. I had the financial connection. I had the cell tower pings. But I still lacked the one thing that would destroy them in a way they couldn't recover from, the motive for the elaborate deception. The text message had started this, and I still didn't have the text message itself. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was a quiet man with silver hair and eyes that had seen everything. He looked at my file, the detailed timelines, the cross-referenced financial documents, the real estate shell companies, and simply nodded. "Elias," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "You didn't come to me for a separation. You came to me for an obliteration, and you've given me the map." We filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery and fraud, citing specific financial misconduct. Leila was stunned. She had expected me to yell, to cry, to break down at the reception. She hadn't expected me to wait, gather evidence for 3 months, and file with a full forensic audit already completed. Her lawyer, a younger, aggressive woman, immediately tried to paint me as emotionally unstable and paranoid. She argued that the legacy money was a private gift, and Owen's payments were a simple business loan that I was misinterpreting in my emotional distress. We moved to the discovery phase. This is where I finally got the tools of the court to work for me. The deposition of Owen was scheduled first. Owen walked in looking like the same old friend, but his face was tight. He still had no idea I knew about the apartment or the extent of the financial transfers. He thought I was just accusing him of a brief fling, Mr. Henderson began calmly. He focused only on the business loan narrative. Mr. Owen, Henderson said, adjusting his tie. You testified that the monthly payments to Ms. Leila's account were a business loan for a future project, correct? Correct, Owen said firmly. Could you specify the terms of that loan, the promissory note, the interest rate, the repayment schedule? Owen stammered. It was an informal agreement between friends. We've been close for a long time. Indeed. Close enough to give Ms. Leila $15,000 every month for 18 months without a single written contract. That totaled $270,000, Mr. Owen, is that a standard practice in your real estate development firm? Owen sweated. It was a favor. A favor paid into an account labeled Legacy Trust Account LA Gifting, which, as the bank records confirm, is also the same account that paid the utilities for the River's Edge condo, Unit 212, since 2022. Is that correct, Mr. Owen? The room went silent. Owen's aggressive lawyer bolted upright. Objection, relevance. Relevance is establishing the actual use of the alleged business loan, Counselor, Henderson replied smoothly. Owen looked at me then. For the first time since the reception, I saw a flicker of real terror in his eyes. I kept my face perfectly neutral. I gave him the stoicism he hadn't expected. Mr. Owen, one final question for this line of inquiry, Henderson continued. The initial payment of $15,000 occurred the same week that Ms. Leila received a text message from your phone. That message, retrieved from her cloud backup, simply contained the words, "It's done. Secure the space." Can you explain the meaning of that transaction, Mr. Owen? This was the text, not the one from the reception. That was a check-in. This was the original one the architect of the whole plot sent 18 months ago. I had used a court order to subpoena her carrier and cloud backups. Owen closed his eyes. His betrayal had been laid bare in the most clinical, undeniable terms. The space. It was where we were going to move after the divorce, he whispered. Leila was never going to marry Elias. The plan was to be engaged, get the public goodwill, and then after a few months of marriage, use the emotional distress of a quick breakup to secure a larger alimony and split our assets before the legacy money was discovered. I was funding her exit strategy. The sheer cold-blooded calculation of it was worse than I could have imagined. She hadn't married me for me. She had married me as a financial tool for divorce. The court case moved quickly after. Owen's confession. Leila's lawyer realized they couldn't salvage the adultery case, so they pivoted to a fair division of assets. They argued that even if she had cheated, the assets were acquired during the marriage and should be split 50-50. This was the final piece of the puzzle. I had the betrayal, the collusion, and the financial history. Now I needed the motive. I sat across from Leila in the final mediation session, just the lawyers, the mediator, and us. She wouldn't look at me. She just kept tapping a pen on the table. Mr. Elias, the mediator said gently, your lawyer has presented compelling evidence of fraud that voids the prenup, but Mrs. Leila is still entitled to a portion of the marital assets. Can we reach a settlement? I leaned forward. I spoke directly to Leila, but my voice was calm, almost conversational. Leila, I said, before we finalize the distribution, I have to know. I'm not asking for the court. I'm asking you as the man who was planning to spend the next 40 years of his life with you. Why the elaborate plan? Why the marriage? Why me? She looked up finally. Her eyes were hard. You think you're so smart with your data. You think you know everything. I know $270,000 was moved. I know about the apartment. I know about the text. Tell me the one thing I don't know, the central calculation. She sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion, not remorse. It was the company Elias, she said. Your startup. You had just secured the Series B funding. The valuation jumped from $3 million to $30 million the month before the wedding. Owen calculated, based on the laws in this state, that waiting 3 months after marriage would allow me to claim a far larger percentage of that initial seed equity as a marital asset than if we had simply cohabited. She paused, looking directly at the mediator. The $270,000 was Owen's investment in my future, the cost of establishing the separate life. But the real money was your company. I was marrying your valuation, Elias, not you. It was a staggering, final piece of information. I wasn't just betrayed, I was a financial instrument. The whole wedding, the vows, the dancing, it was all a leveraged buyout. And the smile at the altar, I asked. The minister was talking about unity and trust. I realized in that moment I was looking at you, thinking about how easy it was to manipulate you, and I almost laughed. I had to stop the emotion, or the whole thing would have collapsed right there. The words hung in the air. This was the emotional reckoning I had waited for. The raw, ugly truth. I turned to Mr. Henderson. Settle it. Give her the standard 10% of the joint savings and nothing more. I want her gone. I want Owen gone. I want this date a model closed. Because of the clear evidence of fraudulent intent, the judge ultimately sided with us. Leila got a fraction of what she planned for, and I kept my company, my dignity, and the most valuable lesson of my life. That even perfect trust must be verified. I never lost my composure. I never raised my voice. I took the information, processed the anomaly, and applied the necessary corrections. The wedding photo still hangs in my office, the one where I am looking at the ring and she is looking at me. I look at it every morning. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in rage, but in the quiet, stoic resolution to find the truth, no matter how much it costs. The day I held my peace at the altar was the day I started fighting the greatest war of my life.